Samson and Delilah.
Samson was the strongest man in all the promised land. And it was well that he was strong, for in those days wild beasts roamed the country. Lions and bears came down from the mountains into the fields. One day, when Samson was working on his farm, a young lion sprang at him. But Samson was so strong, he tore the lion apart with his hands. But the people of Israel also had men for enemies, the Philistines, a tribe of warriors on the western border of the land. Time and again, the Philistines would make their way into Israelite land and lay waste the towns. But the people of Israel wanted peace. They bound the Philistines and brought him to Lahi. And they carried spears. Samson had nothing, but the Spirit of the Lord entered into Samson. His binding fell from his hands, and he picked up the jawbone of an ass. Now this is how it came about. With a woman, Delilah was her name. And the Philistines came to her saying,
How?
To tell her the secret of his strength. At first he would not, but she asked again and again, and at last Samson said,
"The day I was born, my mother and father gave me to God. They swore, and then I swore, that I would drink no wine and eat no unclean food, and never would I cut my hair. And because I have kept my word, God has given me great strength."
So, if your head were shaved...
I would become as weak as you are.
So Delilah sent for the Philistines, and they paid her money, and she told them. Then the next night, while Samson slept, she sent for a barber, and he shaved off his hair. Then she called out,
Wake up, Samson. The Philistines have come. Strike them down.
But Samson could not, because now he was no stronger than any other man. And the Philistines took him prisoner and carried him to their own city, to Gaza. And there they treated him cruelly. They put out his eyes and bound him with chains and set him to work grinding corn like a slave. Then one day, many weeks later, the Philistines held a great feast in Gaza to mark their victory over Samson and the Israelites. The feast was held in a great hall. Its roof rested on pillars, and thousands of people came and filled the hall and stood on the roof. And the king of the Philistines sent for Samson, and he was brought in. And the people laughed at the blind man as he stood there in his chains between two pillars. No one seemed to notice that Samson's hair had begun to grow back. And as the Philistines laughed, Samson said in his heart,
"O Lord God, remember me and strengthen me only this once, O God."
And Samson put his hands against the pillars, his right hand against one, his left hand against the other, and he said,
"Let me die with the Philistines."
And he pushed against the pillars, and so great was his strength, they burst apart. And the roof of the hall gave way, and everyone on it and under it, even Samson, was crushed to death. And his brothers came over to Gaza and found Samson's body, and brought him home to lie beside his father in the land of the Israelites.
David and Goliath.
Samson died in the land of the Philistines. Then, after many years, God sent a man to lead Samson's people. Saul was his name, and he was the first king over Israel. But the Philistines went to war against him, and in the army of the Philistines was a man they thought mightier even than Samson, a giant of a man, Goliath. two armies were drawn up facing one another, and Goliath stood forth and called out to the army of Israel,
Choose a man to fight me. If he can kill me, we will be your slaves. But if I kill him, you shall serve us. Send me a man.
But no man stepped forward. Goliath was too mighty. Now in the army of Israel, there were two brothers from Bethlehem, and their father sent his youngest son, David, to them with food. And when David came near the battlefield, he saw Goliath, and he heard him say,
Day after day, I ask you to send a man to fight me. Where is he? Is there not one man among you all?
And David grew angry, and he said to his brothers,
Who is this Philistine? How dare he defy the armies of God?
Carried to King him. And David said,
I am not afraid of Goliath. I will fight him for Israel.
You cannot. He is a warrior, and you...
I know, sir, I am only a shepherd. But I have killed bears and lions to save my sheep. The Lord God helped me against them. He will help me against Goliath also.
Go then, and the Lord be with you.
Then David went forth from King Saul, and he looked for stones, and put them in a bag over his shoulder. And in his hand he carried a sling. And when Goliath saw him, the giant cursed David, saying,
What am I, a dog? That a boy comes out against me? Go back, or I will feed you to the birds.
No, your body will feed them. You come against me with a sword and a spear, but I come against you in the name of the Lord of hosts, and he will give me the victory.
Goliath laughed and lifted his spear, but David ran toward him, and as he ran, he took a stone from his bag and put it in his sling, and slung it with all his might, and it struck Goliath on the forehead. And Goliath, the giant, the champion of the Philistines, fell flat on his face on the ground. And David ran to him and took the death, and seeing and fled, and the army of Israel pursued them. David into his palace, and in time made him a captain in the army. And later, when Saul died, David became king over Israel.
The wisdom of Solomon.
Saul was the first king over Israel. Then David became king. And the third king was David's son, Solomon. Now he was a very young man when David died, and he loved God very much. And one night, after Solomon had prayed all day to God at the altar at Gibeon, he had a dream. And God appeared to him, saying, What shall I give you?
O Lord my God, I am young. I do not know how to rule. Give me wisdom and understanding, so that I may tell good from evil and rule fairly over your people.
This pleases me, and because you have asked for this, and not for long life for yourself, or for riches, I will give it to you. I will give you more wisdom than any man before you, or any that will come after.
Solomon woke up then, and knew he had been dreaming, and he went down from Gibeon to Jerusalem. Now 2 women came before his throne in the palace, asking for judgment. And the first woman said,
My lord king, this woman and I live in the same house, and a short time ago we each had a baby. But last night, while I slept, her baby died. And she got up and took my baby from me, and gave me the dead child instead.
No, she lies, my lord.
I speak the truth. I know my own child, and he lives.
The living child is mine. Yours is dead.
The 2 women argued on, and not one man who stood around the king could tell which spoke the truth. And they looked to Solomon to tell them. And Solomon said,
Let a sword be brought to me.
and the people wondered what the king had in mind. Then when the sword was brought to him, Solomon said,
Divide the living child. Let him be cut in two. And give half to one woman and half to the other.
Oh, no, let her have the child. Do not kill him, I beg you.
And you, what do you say?
Let neither of us have it. Cut it in two.
Then Solomon shook his head, and he told his man to put the sword away. And he said,
Give the living child to the woman who begged me to spare him. She is its mother.
And when the people of Israel heard what the king had decided, every man was glad, for they saw that Solomon had been given the wisdom of God to rule over them.